Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 17. Is that what we're on now?
17.
Of Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. I am one of your co-hosts. My name is Sean Briggs. I'm here with my brother-in-law / co-host, Sam Marvin. How you doing, Sam?
I'm doing well, Sean. Looking forward to the conclusion of our fantasy football league. For those of you who are listeners, you know that Sean and I enjoy fantasy literature and movies. We also enjoy fantasy football, although Sean is better and it will likely defeat me soundly in this year's final matchup, right, where this is the championship for the league.
Yeah, if people have been following, I think we've brought it up a couple times during the podcast, but I am trying to find my three-peat as champion of our league, of our family league. And yeah, Sam, this week should have been a lot closer, but you left about 80 points on the bench between two players.
Yeah, it was probably the most frustrating game this year, the most frustrating weekend this year. I tried to make some bold moves, and those did not really pan out as much as I would have wanted them to. And so I'm going to pay the consequences or suffer the consequences, and we'll probably lose. And everybody in the league who wanted to see Sean not three-peat is going to be disappointed and angry. And I'll probably have to carry the shame into next year.
I mean, if I do end up winning, we'll find out. This is Sunday. We'll find out tonight at about 8 p.m. Pacific, if I pull it out or not. But if I do win, I will put an asterisk on the trophy and give you partial credit for my win because you deserve it.
Because I picked my players so badly last week. Yeah. or something else.
Yeah. But on top of fantasy football, we have taken the last 2 weeks off because it was for those who practice Hanukkah and Christmas and New Year's. Did you have a good holidays? Yeah. I didn't see you this time. I didn't come back to Michigan for Christmas.
Yeah, we had a fun visit. Went to saw your folks on the west side and were there for a couple of days, left after Christmas, drove down to DC and saw my folks. Not everybody, but most of my, or not a lot of my family. And then on the drive, both down to DC and coming back, Haley and I listened to one of the books in the Witcher series, which is something that I'm getting a little bit more into, and something I think we've talked about the Witcher, kind of the changes in the show. We haven't talked about any of the actual show content itself, but we will be doing that when it comes out later this year.
And I will say, over this break, I watched the new prequel series on Netflix, Witcher Blood Origins, and I've got a bunch of thoughts on that.
Yeah, I have heard and I've seen a little bit of the commentary, but maybe I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if we want to talk about that.
Well, the only thing that I'll put as like if you're listening and you're into The Witcher and you haven't watched The Witcher Blood Origins yet, my only commentary on it is it's a 4-episode miniseries, basically. Each episode is about an hour long. They just try to do too much in 4 hours. And if they would have made it a couple episodes longer and given me more backstory and information, I think it would have flown really well. But, I enjoyed the story. The story was good. I just didn't really care for any of the characters because there wasn't enough time to set them up, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But I do think it's worth watching. Rotten Tomatoes had like a 35%.
Oh, that's higher than I thought. I saw something like an 8% audience score. Yeah.
I mean, it could be that low. Like I said, I enjoyed it. I didn't really look at any of the ratings or anything before because I wanted to go in with a blank slate. But, it's worth watching if you like The Witcher. I think it was good.
Well, we had a couple more we had a couple more days off from work after getting back from Washington, D.C., and we ended up just watching a few episodes of season 1 and then into season 2 of The Witcher on Netflix, the book kind of re-whetted our appetite for the show. So I'm looking forward to discussing that when we get to it. But we are here today to talk about the 1977 Rankin Bass animated Hobbit movie.
And I will say we have an error that we need to correct. At the end of our last episode, we said we were going to be watching the Bakshi Hobbit.
Oh, we did.
We did. And that is a mistake on our part. We should have specified that we would be watching the Rankin and Bass Hobbit. And I would like to thank Allison Backus Troy, follower on Facebook of the podcast, who corrected us on that. And that was our oversight on the directors of the film. But we got it corrected. And Rankin Bass Hobbit is what we will be talking about today.
So let's, before we jump into our thoughts on the movie itself, just kind of more of a meta commentary. I think I mentioned this back when we started our coverage of Lord of the Rings, really started this podcast, is that this was my first taste of the Tolkien universe. I remember watching this movie with my dad on VHS, and I still have that VHS. I actually ran across it the other day when I was looking for my DVD version of The Hobbit, the animated Hobbit. And I had no idea about Lord of the Rings. This was purely The Hobbit kind of stood alone, which I think is really standard for many folks. The Hobbit is a children's story. It's easy to access as a younger kid. But of course, when this movie was produced, the Lord of the Rings had been out. It was a huge hit, and it even, we can talk about it in the movie, but it hints at the continuation of the story and Frodo and everything else. Sean, what was your first experience with the animated Hobbit movie?
My first experience with The Hobbit in general was 6th grade. I had not read the book. I had not seen this animated film. And we were in like a reading competition for middle school. And when I was going through the books to try to find one to read, I found the graphic novel version of The Hobbit. And that is my first intro into Lord of the Rings in general, in terms of books. And then I think I discovered the animated Hobbit movie while I was in high school, I think.
Okay.
Early college. And I think I watched it then. I mean, it's not a movie that my family was like watching together.
So this was after this is after the Lord of the Rings movies came out, and after, I'm assuming, you'd read Lord of the Rings, the book.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Like in high school, well, I guess I was 9 years old when the Fellowship of the Ring came out. So I'm sure that I had seen the movies, and then I watched or read the graphic novel version of The Hobbit. And then that got me into, maybe I should read The Hobbit. And then I read that. And then I was like, maybe I should read Lord of the Rings. So it kind of just set me off on my love affair for Tolkien in general. But yeah, I think it was probably high school when I watched this movie for the first time. Now, I think you and I both, when we talk about it, we're going to say we both thoroughly enjoy this animated movie. I think it does a really good job.
Great movie. Wonderful adaptation of the book. Really interesting contrast to the Peter Jackson live action trilogy. That was one of the things that we kind of talked about in our pre-recording session, is you can take a children's book, which is how many pages? Just about 300 pages, animate it and turn it into a movie that is 70 minutes. And it effectively tells the story. They include the songs, they include all of the highlights. There's a few things that are cut, but you can tell the Hobbit story cinematically, animated. And I'm sure you could have done it with a live action movie that was 2 hours, 2.5 hours. But instead, now for me, when I want to watch the story of the Hobbit, announcement out there, Haley and I are expecting our first child in March. And at some
Champagne
point,
pop.
There we go. Something's popping.
Oh God.
At some point, I'll be introducing them to the Hobbit. It's probably going to start with the book, and then it's going to be this movie. And I'm not going to let them know that the Jackson trilogy exists. They can find it on their own and come to terms with that as they will. Yeah,
we did say the Rankin Bass Hobbit film is about an hour and 10 minutes long. And granted, this is like a general thought, just as you watch the animated film, it's very choppy. So when we were talking about it before, we started with Rivendell, when the dwarves and Bilbo Gandalf get there. There's like a couple minute scene where they have dinner with Elrond and he tells them about the moon runes. He identifies the swords, and then there's a cut scene. And the next time we see everybody, they are in the mountain pass trying to find shelter from the rain. So it is very choppy and it's scene by scene. And there's a lot of that filler in the middle that they kind of just threw out the door. Now, the movie shows that you don't really need any of that filler information. It helps. And I think that's where the Jackson trilogy gets to in the weeds, is that they, for some, and I don't know the whole backstory behind why they chose to make it a trilogy, probably just
I do.
Making money. Yeah.
No, there it is.
Yeah. But I guess like where the Jackson trilogy goes astray is that they're trying to, when you watch it, it feels like they're just trying to fill it for filling's sake, right?
Well, you have three stories really going on. There is the story that is in the Hobbit book of a little hobbit joining a troop of dwarves to go on a quest and recover a stolen treasure from a dragon. Then they inserted into that all of the White Council, Dol Guldur stuff with Gandalf and Saruman and Galadriel and infiltrate and discovering the necromancer and all of that. That continues through all three movies. And then you have the kind of subplot of the Hobbit dwarf adventure, which is the Azog and the orcs and the stalking of the group as they're progressing across the continent, and then all of the buildup. So and they just insert all of these things, and then there's a romance plot coming in the second movie and going into the third movie. So there's all of these. It's bloated is the term that best describes the trilogy. This is on the exact opposite, to the point where give me another 20 minutes and we probably could do some more stuff. Like one of the big things that they omit from this movie that's in the book is anything with Beorn.
Yep, Beorn, which
would have been relatively easy to do in an animated movie. You can just animate the werebear, but they didn't do that, and that's fine. But it was possible. But this speaks to some of the choppiness. Is this was originally I don't know if originally, but every available cut is a adaptation of a made for TV version. So there are places where you could tell commercial breaks were inserted. That's the way my VHS copy is. That's the way my DVD copy is, and that's the way my I think any version that you can get on a streaming platform is. It's cut for TV, so you can tell like it had been probably insert another 20-30 minutes of commercials into that runtime to pad out a chunk of TV time.
And really, like, if you took this animated Hobbit and you added 40 minutes and made it a full feature length 2-hour film, you could have a very quality Hobbit adaptation in a movie. And one of the first things, so I'll share my first 2 notes that I wrote down when Carly and I were watching The Hobbit last night. My first note, it proves that the live action could be one movie.
Mm-hmm.
That was my first note. And my second note, the first 3 minutes of the animated film is the first hour of unexpected journey. And you had mentioned that's just them getting out the door in the beginning. And it's so great because you don't even get like the title sequence for the animated movie until Bilbo, he wakes up late and then joins them outside. Yeah. That's when you finally see The Hobbit by Rankin Bass. So, we're going to try to not compare this to Peter Jackson's trilogy of The Hobbit as much as possible. I think sometimes it's just going to be unavoidable as we're going through our recap as we talk about the movie. But it's relatively frustrating because we had the opportunity for a live action adaptation, and it just didn't go as well as we would have wanted it to. And I know eventually you and I will do a recap of the trilogy Hobbit films.
Oh, will we?
Oh, we have to. It's
I don't know.
It's in the show title.
I don't know if I have 12 hours to dedicate to rewatching the Hobbit trilogy, but okay.
I will say, whenever I watch Lord of the Rings, I always watch the extended editions. I don't think I'll be watching the extended Hobbit movies. I'll be watching theatrical cut for sure.
I don't know. Which of those is the director's true vision of that?
None
movie?
of them, because it was supposed to be Guillermo del Toro.
Well, I'd be interested to see what a Guillermo del Toro Hobbit movie would be.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the thing. Like, Jackson wasn't even on board to do these, and he just did it because they didn't have a director.
Yeah.
So is his heart in it? I don't know.
His wallet was, but okay.
Hey,
so
as we've said, mine would be too. You and I are easily bought.
That's right. That's right. Listen, Peter, baby, if you want to get some press for the Hobbit animated, we have dozens of followers out there. Just, drop us a line. We would love to come out to New Zealand on your dime, get the tour. And then in exchange for that, we will do 3, 4, 5 episodes focused on the greatness of the Hobbit trilogy that you put together.
And we will try to convince dozens of people that it is a great trilogy.
Okay. So what else do we love about the Hobbit animated?
Music.
Yes.
That is one of the things that I noticed. If you love American folk music, especially like 70s folk music, this movie, the soundtrack slaps. I mean, we start with The Greatest Adventure by Glenn Yarborough. He's the guy who sings it. But as I was listening or as I was watching, every song is so good. Down Down to Goblin Town.
Great one.
Amazing.
Yes.
It's just so good. And the music throughout, it's not just like the one theme song. It's pretty much every song that they play is fantastic.
I have to say, I don't really like The Greatest Adventure. I know. I said it when I was watching, when Haley and I were watching together Friday night, and The Greatest Adventure starts playing, and I was like, I'm just not into this song. She's like, what? You don't like this one? I was like, yeah, I didn't grow up listening to adult contemporary. It just wasn't I don't like it. But yeah, Down to Goblin Town, I love. 15 Birds and 5 Fir Trees, which is the next song after that. The Greatest Adventure to me is my least favorite, but overall, the songs, the music in this movie are phenomenal, and it really elevates it to a point which, like, as a point of comparison, going back to the Hobbit movie, I don't recall when songs were used in the Peter Jackson trilogy, except for the
Misty Mountain song.
Misty Mountains, and then the Bilbo Baggins. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates.
That's what Bilbo Baggins hates.
Yeah, but they do it differently, and it's a lot slower in the animated, in the Peter Jackson trilogy, and it's the same song, the same lyrics, just compare it side by side. Mm-hmm. I would say the Hobbit animated takes the cake as far as how that song. It's fun. It's exuberant. It establishes his character well. The one that in the Peter Jackson song is very distracting because the dwarves are singing it, and I'm just being a little bit too animated. No, they're too emotive. It's very hammy. But in the animated version, the song is kind of center stage, not the visuals going on of the people singing.
I don't know. To me, the two renditions, it's like, do I want carrot cake or cheesecake? It just depends on my mood. They're both good. Shout out to Carrot Cake, which is a very underappreciated dessert mode. As we progress, music to me was up there. Even let's talk about voice acting. Because when I was looking through these, unfortunately, none of the voice actors are alive anymore. As I was going through the cast, I started by, who was it? It was, the actor who plays Thranduil.
Oh, yeah.
Because we had mentioned that he sounded European. I initially thought he kind of sounded a little French. And then when we got on, I found out he was Austrian. You called that perfectly. So I started with him, and then while I was on the Wikipedia page, I started just going through all the different actors to learn more about them. But as I'm going through, I realized none of them are alive anymore. The most recent passed away in 2020, but the voice actor who plays Elrond, his first name is Cyril, and I'm forgetting his last name if you want to look it up while I'm talking quick. He was born in 1898, and I just found that to be pretty astounding. I mean, if he's recording in the 70s, he'd be in his 80s by this point. But yeah, super old cast.
Cyril Ritchard.
Cyril Ritchard.
I mean, I think some of these individuals were probably more known to audiences of the time, even, or maybe their names would have been familiar, even if they were not actively getting starring roles. But John Huston is the narrator and Gandalf. John Huston is a Hollywood icon. I think he wrote and directed The African Queen. Let's see. Yeah, he worked with Humphrey Bogart a lot. So Maltese Falcon, Treasure of the Sierra Madre, Asphalt Jungle, African Queen. He's the father of Angelica Houston, who is very well known in Hollywood.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Nice.
He was. Have you ever seen the movie Chinatown?
I have not.
He's in Chinatown as kind of a, well, I won't spoil Chinatown for our listeners, but Chinatown, great movie. So and then I also want to say, I think the voice actor who does Smaug is someone who was well known at the time. Like they had been an actor in a lot of Westerns. Yeah. So the voice actor for Smaug is Richard Boone, who was in 50 movies over the course of his career. Passed away shortly after the animated Hobbit was released, but just somebody who would have been pretty well known to audiences of the time, or just a general audience at all, which is interesting because now we're sitting here, almost 50 years later, and those voices are not recognizable to us whatsoever.
And a crazy one that I found out when I was going through the names, Thurl Ravenscroft, who is the singing voice for the goblins, also is the guy who sings "You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch" in the television classic.
There you go.
So if you were watching the animated Hobbit, we had a Facebook page announcing that this is going to be the film that we were talking about today, to give people the opportunity to listen and follow along with us on Wednesday when this drops. If you were listening and you thought you heard "You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch" during Downtown to Goblin Town, you're not crazy.
So, question for you. What was the animation studio that did How the Grinch Stole Christmas?
I'm assuming it's the same one.
Well, I don't know. I was asking you.
I have no idea.
I'm trying to find it out.
Yes, my knowledge of 70s animation studios is not very good.
So I don't believe it was Rankin and Bass. I think it's just Warner Brothers. But nonetheless, interesting connection there. Thurl Ravenscroft. Great name, by the way. Fantastic name. Sounds like he should be a character in The Witcher.
Yeah, and Wikipedia isn't even saying born this. So that was his name, Thurl Arthur Ravenscroft.
I think there is a decent amount of
Ravenscrofts out there.
No. Yeah. I don't know. You can fall into some interesting, I don't want to say wiki holes necessarily, but there's interesting trivia about the cast that they selected. Obviously, we mentioned John Huston. Otto Preminger is an actor. He was in Anatomy of a Murder, which was filmed in and set in Michigan, which was kind of a fun piece of trivia since both of us are Michigan natives. Yeah, great voice acting, good songs, good music, and a very well-paced movie. What are the you did mention a few areas where it maybe because of the pacing or whatever else there were departures from the base lore. What are some of those ones that stand out for you?
Yeah, so as I'm looking through my notes, there's a sequence when Bilbo's dreaming before he realizes he's late to joining the dwarves. When Bilbo is dreaming that he is on the throne and being brought gifts in the Lonely Mountain, he is dreaming that he is wearing shoes. I don't know if you caught that, but that really took me aback when I saw a hobbit wearing shoes.
Which is interesting because obviously hobbits do not wear shoes. And then the movie goes out of its way to show how hairy his feet
His
are
feet
and
are.
how unclad they are. I wonder if in his dream, we just missed the part where the dwarves were telling him, listen, we'll make you the king, but you got to put some shoes on. You know, everybody makes compromises when they ascend into a leadership position. And for him, it was putting shoes on, even in his own dream.
Another thing that I saw when Bilbo's looking at the map for the first time, how does he know that there's a secret door in the side of the mountain?
Well, he's good with maps.
Because when you see the map,
that.
It's legit a hand pointing at the entire mountain, not like a specific part of the mountain. And only when Elrond is reading the moon runes that are invisible does he see that it's pertaining to a secret door.
I think we can, well, I don't recall if in the book there's an explanation of how he puts 2 and 2 together. There are some non-moon runes on the map, which, although to be fair, he needed to be explained what runes were. So he probably wasn't interpreting runes that were on there that were not invisible at the time. So I think we can probably chalk that up to the they need to explain that there's a secret door, but where it is isn't exactly clear, and establish the need to talk to Elrond, and they wanted to do it in 10 seconds of dialogue.
And they just want to move the plot forward.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't hate it. I get it. It's an animated kids movie. I'm just pointing out my observations as I was watching.
So there's one for me that you mentioned as well, or you saw as well, that I think is interesting just because it's unnecessary, which is the fact that there's a close-up of the ring when Bilbo finds it in Gollum's cave, and it has engravings on it. The ring famously is without adornment. There's no stone, there's no engraving until you get it hot and it shows the inscription of the Lord of the Lord of the Rings inscription. Which, to me, this movie was made at a time when I think they were setting up a Lord of the Rings animated continuation, which in fact they eventually did a Return of the King version. This production house did. So they didn't necessarily we know that they knew the description of the ring from the Lord of the Rings, and they just chose to engrave it. It's the most minor detail, but something that is explicitly mentioned and is contradicted. So,
and that's where we'll get back to, like, even with Rings of Power, when you Google these, or even in the credits in the title scene, it will say based on Lord of the Rings. So that's where we just need to get the stick out of our butts. And
oh yeah, we're just talking about this because it's a thing to mention. It doesn't negatively impact the movie whatsoever. And it's something
yeah, and that's me just throwing shade at the critics of Rings of Power who are just overly critical. You know what I mean?
Right. I think the difference is that some of the so-called lore changes were fundamental to the story that you're telling in the world in which it's set. Right. This is the ring is the only change is how it looks, nothing about what it does or what it is.
Speaking of fundamental changes that really threw me off, Elrond in the animated Hobbit has a beard. The fuck's up with that? I
don't know. I think they needed to show that he was old, and they couldn't get into the explanation of the elder days and all that.
But it's saying something that out of this entire film, one of the things that really bothered me was an elf having a beard.
So depiction of elves is important because Elrond has a beard, and I think his ears are long and pointy, longer and pointy.
He has a crown of light.
And that's an interesting way to demonstrate the kind of otherworld magical nature of the elves. But then later in the story, when we get to Mirkwood and the kingdom of the elves, which is they don't name any of the elves there. I think it's just Elf King, which is what it was referred to in the book, but the character we know is Thranduil. Those elves look a lot more kind of fairy-ish or pixie-ish. They have exaggerated facial features, really long limbs. Their ears are very long and pointy and curly. And then there's one shot of the Elf King Thranduil, and he's sitting on his throne. He's not wearing shoes. So different cultural approaches to shoes in royalty between the elves and the dwarves, and his feet are showing and his toes are really long, almost kind of like an animal, some sort of aquatic creature or something like that, which is interesting. And they're just, again, going out of the way to demonstrate the strangeness and the weirdness of it all. But according to Lord of the Rings, the elves would look basically like humans, except for somewhat fey. But this is the children's animated Hobbit. You need to demonstrate that these are very much different than the humans and the dwarves. And so they went in this direction.
Well, even that, like, I noticed when you look at how Elrond is portrayed, like the high elves versus the wood elves look entirely different. Elrond still looks basically human.
Yeah.
With a couple, like he has the pointy ears, like you said, and things like that. But it is night and day between the portrayal of a high elf and a wood elf. And I had also noticed that when it comes to the wood elves, it may have been a budget issue. And you mentioned this with the the guards or soldiers at Lake Town, but every wood elf looks exactly the same. Even Thranduil, like the face, everything. They just copy pasted all of these different wood elves, and the goblins look all the same too. But I mean, they're goblins. And I had mentioned my view of the goblin. They basically look like a giant bullfrog with horns. Just a funny interpretation of what a goblin is.
Yeah.
Didn't hate it.
No, and what I like about these goblins, what actually makes them scary, is the fact that their mouths are so huge. There's the scene when the dwarves are captured and taken in front of the Great Goblin right before Gandalf shows up and rescues everybody, where the Great Goblin is angry at the dwarves because at that point, Thorin is carrying around Orcrist, and this angers the Great Goblin. And he comes up to Thorin and he looks as if he's going to bite him or swallow him. And obviously it's animated, so they can show his mouth stretching this huge maw. And of course, then Gandalf shows up just in time to save the day. But these are very much more animalistic creatures. It comes off well. And then I notice a lot of similarities in especially their face and their teeth to the other monsters, the spiders in Mirkwood, Smaug. I would say the ogres to me, or excuse me, the trolls rather, at the beginning, those actually looked those were somewhat different, which I appreciated. But yeah, going back to your point about all the wood elves look the same. I saw a lot of similarities in the humans, in Lake Town, especially the soldiers that we get. First, the archers with Bard when he kills Smaug, and then later when the soldiers are marching in the battle of the five armies.
I've noticed you pronounce the dragon's name like Jackson's trilogy.
Yeah, that's just a fun thing that I do.
Because one of my notes about the animated film was they go out of their way to say Smaug. And I hear you with a Smaug type of pronunciation.
So I will admit that I am a fan of...
That's one of the things you love about Jackson's trilogy.
No, yeah, that's my favorite part of the Jackson trilogy is the pronunciation of Smaug.
You feel vindicated.
No, I am a fan of Red Letter Media, and they discussed the Jackson trilogy and they pronounce it Smaug. And I think they do it kind of tongue in cheek, but for whatever reason, it's just imprinted on me as saying Smaug. I don't know if the Jackson trilogy did it, there's some basis in the way that, it's an interesting name. I don't know what its origins are. Maybe that's how Tolkien intended it to be pronounced.
I don't know. I prefer Smaug. And when they started saying my interpretation of the name in the animated film, I finally felt at ease, because every time they said the name in the live action, I cringed. But that's a personal preference.
It is.
In terms of the goblins, I wrote down, I enjoyed this version of the Goblin King way more in the live action.
Oh yeah. Yes.
The Goblin King being 10 times the size of a goblin and just grotesque and monstrous. This one, it's jowls, or it's bullfrog, whatever you call that, frog pouch, was bigger, but it wasn't grotesque.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I really enjoyed this interpretation a lot more than Jackson's personally. But one of the problems that I did have with the Goblin King, when Gandalf comes in with Glamdring and he puts it up in the air and it kind of lights up, the Goblin King immediately goes, "I know that sword. It's whatever, the Goblin Smasher or whatever
It's
nickname.
Orcrist is the Goblin Cleaver.
Faux
and
hammer.
Glamdring is the faux
Yeah.
hammer. Yeah.
So, and then he goes, "That's the faux hammer." And it's like, man, this sword has been not in public view for like thousands of years, and you can see it and know exactly what it is.
Well, that's in the book. I remember that.
I don't know.
They don't. I don't know if they use their elven names. They call them Biter and Beater. Let me
well, still.
let me turn to my handy dandy. So okay, so before we get to the specifics, I picked up on that as well, because not even the Goblin King in the animated show or the animated movie, one of the orc or the Goblin guards says he's got this sword. It's called Orcrist, the Goblin Cleaver, and then that kind of turns into the elf friend and murderer. My explanation is that those swords were, I think earlier in the movie we get the explanation from Elrond that they were forged in the Goblin Wars. I think in later revisions and when Tolkien is kind of putting together the Legendarium, those swords were forged in Gondolin during the First Age and the struggle against Morgoth. My interpretation is that those swords acquired a kind of mythical status among orcs and goblin kind, and this would be the equivalent of.
Oh, please give me an equivalence.
Well, okay, so I was gonna say like
Yes.
this, like the Spear of Destiny, right? If you were this
Okay,
artifact,
but here's the
weapon.
thing: if someone had this, like, no one knows the Spear of Destiny looks like, because it's been 2,000 years.
I know, but let's just say the Spear of Destiny.
For those who
said
don't know,
Spear of Destiny.
The Spear of Destiny is the spear that stabbed Jesus when he was on the cross.
And later was supposedly discovered during the First Crusade and was what led to the success of, or inspired the Crusaders to defend the city of Odessa, and then it later made its way back to Europe, and I think it was in the possession of the Holy Roman Emperor for a long time, and then eventually the Austrian-Hungarian monarchy. But yes.
But still, if someone just had a spear, like, I wouldn't, if you showed me 5 spears.
Excalibur.
Again, if you showed me 5 medieval swords and you're like, which one of these is Excalibur? I'd be like, I don't know.
You have chosen poorly.
I know. I was about to say, I feel like I'd be Indiana Jones with the.
No. Let's say that if you had.
We are getting far into
we are,
but on this one.
Whatever. It's our podcast. We can talk about what we want to talk about.
You have to listen to us debate this.
Don't delete the episode now, people. This is juicy stuff.
Yeah, please don't turn us off, but keep listening.
Here's the thing. If you discovered a sword that said Excalibur on it, and you said, "Hey, this is Excalibur,"
so, hold on. So I have
you're not going to get into an archaeological debate.
No, shut the fuck up. I have a point.
Where it's
I have a
from.
point. Excalibur, if I found it, like I went out to a lake and just found Excalibur, it wouldn't just in English say Excalibur.
No, it wouldn't, but he would say it in, hey man, I don't know. Okay.
It would say in like high medieval English, which I don't understand.
Well, it probably would say it in Latin.
Okay, nitpicking.
Which people still read, right? I can read a little bit of Latin. So theoretically, if Elrond was able to interpret the runes on the swords to say this is Orcrist and this is Glamdring, maybe if these swords are mythic in the minds of goblins and they're included in songs and stories that goblins tell each other about how cruel and bloodthirsty the elves are, maybe the names of the swords and the markings on the swords have also made it into this kind of cultural transmission. Again,
I don't buy it.
I think they needed an explanation. I think Tolkien just said the goblins identify the swords as Biter and Beater. Now I'll find that sequence if you have any rejoinder to my comment.
Well, I just don't buy it. Like, for so many different reasons. Like, if the goblins, by just looking at them, can be like, oh yeah, this is what they are, without even reading the runes, because there's no way the Goblin King from 100 feet away sitting on his throne is going to look at it from a distance and be like, oh yeah, that's what it is. And it takes Elrond having to read the runes to figure out what these swords are. I mean,
Well,
that's where
so-
I just don't buy it.
And you think, Gandalf would probably be able to read the runes, right? But
He should be able
we're
to,
not going to
yeah.
get 100% logical consistency with everything here. But I could see how theoretically the elven swords from that, slew the hundreds times removed ancestors of the goblins and in this legendary fashion became
That's where I just find that so ridiculous. Because if someone was legit, like I said, if you showed me 5 swords and you said one of them was Excalibur, I'd be like, I don't know, this one, and I'd just guess. I'd have a 20% chance of guessing right.
Yeah, well, I mean, we don't spend a lot of time around swords. Okay, so this is from the chapter Over Hill and Under Hill in The Hobbit. He is a liar, O truly tremendous one, said one of the drivers. Several of our people were struck by lightning in the cave when we invited these creatures to come below, and they are as dead as stones. Also, he has not explained this. He held out the sword which Thorin had worn, the sword which came from the troll's lair. The great goblin gave a truly awful howl of rage when he looked at it, and all his soldiers gnashed their teeth, clashed their shields, and stamped. They knew the sword at once. It had killed hundreds of goblins in its time when the fair elves of Gondolin hunted them in the hills or did battle before their wall. So he does mention Gondolin.
Yeah, but thousands of years ago. That's where I have a qualm.
But maybe he hadn't established the timeline in when he was writing The Hobbit.
Quit defending Tolkien for something he overlooked.
Tolkien, how could you, when you were telling the story to your children in the 1920s, how could you not foresee what would happen? And then finally, they called it Orcrist, Goblin Cleaver, but the goblins simply called it Biter. They hated it and hated worse anyone that carried it. And then later, Gandalf shows up. And actually said Gandalf has a wand. This is talking about Glamdring. It made no trouble whatever of cutting through the goblin chains and setting all the prisoners free as quickly as possible. This sword's name was Glamdring, the foe hammer, if you remember. The goblins just called it Beater and hated it worse than Biter, if possible. Orcrist too had been saved, for Gandalf had brought it along as well, snatching it from one of the terrified guards. Anyway, there you go. Because I think, going back to that Gondolin point, didn't Tolkien kind of conceive of the fall of Gondolin very early on in his creation of the Legendarium?
Yeah, I believe so.
Anyway, so we've gone on this archaeological, mythic.
Yeah, that took up way more time than I thought it was going to. I thought it was just going to be like a throwaway note that I had, but yeah,
I'm all about it. I'm all about it.
Into that.
Okay, so actually sticking in kind of the same point in the movie, the dwarves and Bilbo are captured by the goblins. We have the whole Glamdring, Orcrist conversation. Then they all make their escape with Gandalf's help. Bilbo is separated, hits his head, falls, rolls into Gollum's cave. That's where he sees the ring, which, as we mentioned, had etchings and carvings on it, unlike the description that we get in the literature. And then he meets Gollum. And you want to talk, Sean, about kind of the portrayal of Gollum?
Yeah, I had noticed when it comes to Gollum, we both really enjoyed the voice acting, and we think there's an homage of Andy Serkis in his portrayal of this character as well. The visuals I really liked. He has the big bulbous eyes. He's got some hair on him. He's not clothed. He's kind of reptilian looking.
Very, very animalistic. Again, he has this very wide mouth that, he's supposed to be a hobbit creature, a hobbit-like creature that's been deformed by the ring, but he looks more like an animal in this, and a lot more so than the portrayal in the live action movies.
And just to reiterate your Tolkien defending, he may not have known that Gollum was a hobbit at this point.
That's true.
So who knows? But that leads me to one of the issues that I have with this Gollum, is that he is supposed to be a former hobbit, but he's like 4 times the size of Bilbo. Even there's a moment where you look at his head compared to Bilbo's head, and it's like at least 2.5 times the size of Bilbo's head. So, one little thing that I had a little qualm, but otherwise, great sequence with Bilbo and the riddles in the dark. You had mentioned earlier before we were recording, they cut out a lot of the riddles, which I'm okay with.
Yeah, we don't need to hear.
Yeah, we just need to just give me the gist. We had the time, which is an important one because that's the one that gets him kind of frustrated. The one riddle that wasn't in there that I really enjoy was the teeth.
Oh, the champing, stamping.
Yeah,
one?
32 horses on a red hill that
First they champ, then they stamp, then they stand
then they
still.
stand still. Yeah.
I thought it's
we get to
32 chestnuts.
I thought it was horses.
Yeah.
Let's look it up.
Let's go to the book. Going to the book here.
But, some of those riddles were just unnecessary, and it just really draws it out and very succinct. Then you get Bilbo finding the ring. What, are you shaking your head? Yes. Is it chestnuts?
30 white horses on a red hill.
Oh, fuck you.
I don't know why. Here.
Is there another one with chestnuts?
Well, no, it's 30 white horses on a red hill. First they champ, then they stamp, then they stand still. That was all he could think of to ask. The idea of eating was rather on his mind. It was rather an old one too, and Gollum knew the answer as well as you do. Chestnuts, chestnuts, he hissed. Teeth, teeth, my precious, but we has only 6. So there you go.
I'm still right. But anyway.
You are correct. Sorry, you were saying about just the cutting the riddles?
Yeah, just it was unnecessary to have all of them. We get the gist of what's going on. Get in, get out, get Bilbo the ring. That's the whole purpose of going down into the lake under the mountain. So again, yeah, that's just an example of you can base your film on the novel and then, cut stuff out. I feel like the live action was adding so many things that they didn't need to add when they could have just cut stuff that they didn't need in the films anyway.
Something that I reacted to this time, during this watch, was there's a little bit of an interlude in the riddle game, and the kind of the camera, to the extent that there is a camera, there's not a camera, but the animation kind of pulls away from Gollum and Bilbo, and it kind of moves around the cave, and there's this lyrics are being sung during it, and it's actually one of the riddles from the book, which I did not recall. So it cannot be seen, cannot be felt, cannot be heard, cannot be smelt. It lies under stars and under hills, and empty holes it fills. It comes first and follows after, ends life, kills laughter. What is that thing, Sean?
I don't remember that one, but it sounds like death.
Dark.
Dark.
Yeah, and it's kind of a haunting rendition of that riddle in a sing-song way, but as they're doing it, they're panning around the cave, and I don't know if you picked up on this, but it looked, and maybe I saw what I wanted to see, but they were kind of very distorted, screaming or anguished faces in the rock formations.
I think you saw it because so when in that scene, I noticed there was a goblin skeleton.
Yes, I saw that
in the sediment, but you also see those faces in Mirkwood in the trees.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you caught that, but
I didn't catch that. But yeah, that makes
but
sense.
I wouldn't be surprised if they put screaming faces in the cave walls as well. Yeah. One thing I noticed throughout the entire movie, Scooby-Doo animation. In those old cartoons, you can clearly tell an object they're going to interact with because it has a different shade to it.
Yeah.
And there are a couple times I noticed it throughout the movie, but when they got to Gollum's lair, there's fabric and webbing that was light gray instead of a little darker gray.
Mm-hmm.
And you could clearly tell that Gollum was about to push it. And I just really noticed it in that moment.
It jumps out. There's a scene early on. I think Bilbo was doing his dishes and he put a plate on the mantle, and the plate is very much differently shaded than everything else in the screen. Yeah. Okay. So maybe we can follow along roughly with the plot. So Bilbo gets the ring.
I was about to say we were pretty much following the plot. And, I have one more shout out on Facebook. Woodsman Hikes commented on our post. He said, "Great movie, but the animation is awful." I'm not going to go as far as saying it's awful. It's 70s animation.
Yeah, it's a cartoon, right? It's a children's cartoon. I'll say this much: I would rather see something like this than them trying to do a more quasi cinematic type animation, right? So what was that Final Fantasy movie? Ghosts of Mars. It's not Ghosts of Mars. That's a John Carpenter movie, but it was something like that. Yeah, it's an artifact of its time, and I would speculate that they probably didn't have a ton of money to put into the animation. probably spent it all on the voice actors.
Probably. But yeah, I like you were saying, we basically have been starting to go from beginning to end of the plot of the film. So let's just carry on with after the Gollum sequence.
I made another note during the Gollum sequence, which is just Gollum talking to himself about eating Bilbo. It's actually a really like creepy thing when you think about it for a children's story. But one of the lines that I love, especially now after having watched a lot of seasons of the Great British Baking Show, is when Gollum says to himself, "Is it scrumptious?"
I was going to say, does he have a soggy bottom?
Yeah, does it have a soggy bottom? That's good. Of course, we get so the dwarves escape separately, and Bilbo is reunited with them, having found the ring and used the ring to evade Gollum. Gandalf sees right through Bilbo's explanation of the ring, and then they move so quickly into resuming the kind of the chase sequence and the continuing conversation with the goblins. We get the great song, 15 birds and 5 fir trees, and then we get the eagles for the first time.
The eagles speaking English like took me so far out of it. And I don't know why, but when they finally drop off the party and then the Eagle King comes up and it's just like, "Oh yes, I will never forget when you healed my arrow wound that time, Gandalf."
I also wrote talking eagle is kind of funny because as he's talking, there are two things that are happening. One is his beak is moving, which, okay, if an animal is going to talk, probably its mouth is going to move, but the animated bird beak moving. And then he's also still doing bird stuff. So he's like kind of preening himself with his beak
while he's talking.
Yeah. And then actually just right before they set down, just the whole Bilbo holding on to, I don't know which dwarf he's holding on to, but he's like, my arms. And the dwarf who's holding on to the eagle.
My legs.
My legs. All right. And then.
Oh, sorry. In that sequence as well, I also noticed for the first time, I don't know why I didn't notice it until now, but Gandalf's eyebrows, like if you look at his beard going into his eyebrows, it's like one giant continuous piece of hair. Like his eyebrows are just a giant unibrow that just goes straight into his huge beard.
Yeah. And he doesn't have a mouth. It's just the beard opens and closes to speak. Yeah. There's no lips or anything like that.
Which again, I know it sounds like we're talking shit, but this is a very good movie and it's funny.
Yeah, it's what they do. It's like, you know what? Drawing lips on every scene when Gandalf is talking is going to take an extra 10 hours. That's time, that's money. So let's just not do that. He's bearded and all you see is the beard moving. So after the eagles in the book, this is when they would have run into Beorn, the werebear, and stay with him for a while. But they cut that and moved kind of directly into traversing Mirkwood, which that whole sequence begins with, I'll call him condescending Gandalf. He starts explaining how, okay, Bilbo, kind of gives them instructions about how to get through Mirkwood, and then I think Bilbo says, "It sounds like you're not coming with us." And then Gandalf says, "I'm not. I've wasted enough time bothering with you people," which is just great. And then
he comes off so saucy in that moment.
Yeah, very saucy Gandalf. And then he gives Bilbo a pen and ink and a paper, and he tells him to document your journey, and then later I'll read it and tell you all the mistakes that you made, which is just great.
And then when they get into Mirkwood, so there's two things I noticed in this scene. The first one is when Bilbo puts the ring on, everything goes invisible but the sword.
Yeah, that's right.
In Jackson's trilogy, The Lord of the Rings, when Frodo puts it on, like everything goes invisible, right?
Yes, and I don't recall an occasion where he had the sword out without the ring. But I mean, it's one of those things where I'm probably just to get the effect that Tolkien wanted in the book, if it's from the book, and then to get the effect they wanted in the movie, they wanted just to have Sting out there. The thing that gets me is Sting, when they're fighting the spiders, Sting is glowing and there's no orcs around.
Yep, that's problematic. Also
problematic. You need to apologize, Rankin and Bass, for your problematic use of Sting.
Bilbo wakes up already half wrapped in spiderweb, and he's not even poisoned. So how is he that deep of a sleeper where he doesn't notice the
Good
bottom
point.
half of him being
Yeah.
wrapped up in spiderwebs?
Yeah, so we're establishing that there are a lot of logical inconsistencies in The Hobbit, which to the extent that they're in the book, I think the Tolkien estate needs to make some edits and reissue The Hobbit based solely on our podcast.
Yeah, we need a
But
remake.
yeah,
We will definitely, for the right price, be consultants on a new animated
right.
Hobbit film. So in Mirkwood, one scene that I did really enjoy was Bilbo climbing the tree and then looking out over the canopy.
And you have the butterflies.
And then the cool animation of the wind blowing over the treetops and him getting a tear in his eye. Like that was all a good moment. And then he had the comment of, I was wondering if I had ever seen my home again, and now I don't know if I want to. And just like that whole like existential thought of, what do I want to do with my life? Is this the start of something new?
And that's
it was a great scene.
And I think I don't know if this is the first time that the song plays in the movie, but it's definitely a good accompaniment, which is The Road Goes Ever On, which I hate to say it, I'm not a huge fan of The Road Goes Ever On, but whatever.
I love in Fellowship of the Ring when Ian Holmes sings it as he's leaving Bag End. I enjoy that version.
Yes, that's a good one.
So do you have anything between Mirkwood and Wood Elves? Is there anything else you wanted to bring up?
The music that accompanies the spiders is really great because it sounds kind of like a bunch of legs hurriedly walking. I don't recall if the description of Shelob in the Lord of the Rings included the stinger as it was portrayed in the Peter Jackson trilogies. Obviously, that's a departure from the actual anatomy of most spiders, whose fangs are what envenomates.
I would say, and in this,
prey.
it's kind of in the animated movie, it's like pincers. I don't know if you noticed that on their butts.
I didn't notice that. I thought pincers on their butts.
On their butts.
Yeah.
Thorax, if we're going to be.
Is it thorax or is it abdomen?
I don't know.
I'm
not an entomologist. I know an entomologist, so I can ask.
Okay, there we go.
I'll offer up a.
Well, that should be next episode. Is we bring an entomologist on and talk about the.
I might be able to. You never know.
Okay. Well, we should get a what's a bird person called? An ornithologist. I was going to say ophthalmologist, but that's obviously not it.
Next episode, we're going to get an entomologist. The episode after that, we're going to get a bird person.
Ornithologist, and discuss the physics of giant eagles. Anyway, so a little bit of the inspiration for the Peter Jackson depiction of Shelob in the animated version. And then we move into the wood elves and all that. What did you have on with the wood elves?
Not really a whole lot. We had already brought up the wood elves all looking the same, the strange accent from Thranduil, and then honestly, it's a very short sequence as they're in the wood elf, the realm of the wood elves, because we have Thorin gets saucy with Thranduil and then gets thrown in jail, and then they legit say, Bilbo, as the narrator, says it took me a few weeks to figure out a way out of here, and then it's Wood Elf gets drunk, he steals the keys, and then they're out. So that's
all voiceover.
Yeah,
we got a barrel song,
a good sequence into Lake
Town. Fun, much different than the Jackson trilogy, with the barrel scene turned into basically a amusement park water ride with orcs shooting at them.
Oh yeah, can we take a second to talk about how shitty of a scene that was in the live action trilogy?
Well, I mean, yes, it was way longer than it needed to be, completely unnecessary. It was all in service of both the subplots that you could have done without. The romance subplot with what's her name? Is it I want to say Tariel, but that's not right, is it?
Yeah, Toriel
with
Keely.
With Keely, and then the Azog Bolg kind of tracking the orcs, or tracking the dwarves rather. So here's the quick little barrel song. Roll, 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 rolling down the hole. Heave ho, splash, plump. Down they go, down they bump. it sets a little bit of music and they, sing it in verse. It's fun. Great little way just to incorporate what the words that Tolkien actually wrote and make the movie fun and memorable, especially to kids. But then we get to Lake Town. And this is where I wrote the note because it occurred to me at the time. There's no bullshit with the humans of Lake Town. There's no funny business with the master. This is something that really dragged in the Jackson trilogy, is just all of the insertion of the drama and the ridiculous acting. And it really weighed it down. But here it's just the dwarves show up. There's more narration explaining how they were fed and clothed and equipped, and then they went on their way, and then we get right back to the quest.
Yep, in and out. That's all we really need.
Yeah, and we get the Mountain King song, which is fun.
Mm-hmm. Yep, we go up to the mountain at this point, and then we find that they still don't really know where the entrance to the mountain is, and apparently they're taking a long time to try to find it, and then they just happen to be in the right spot at the right time when the thrush knocks. So.
Yeah. And there's no ridiculous constraint. Again, maybe I'm getting a little negative here about the Peter Jackson trilogy, but something that really annoyed me was how they emphasize that the door only opens on Midsummer's Day or Durin's Day, as it were. Which now that I'm saying that, I'm wondering if that's actually in the book.
I think it is.
Yeah, it sounds like
because the whole point was trying to get to the mountain by a certain time, by a certain day.
Yeah, I don't recall all the specifics, but it just like I did not like the way that was portrayed in the movie. I felt it was just a little bit overly dramatic, and I really like this interpretation of just, the setting sun will illuminate the keyhole, and the thrush knocks is
just to let you know where it is.
Just to let you know, and like we can kind of get the sense that it's obviously that thrush is, I think, as they say in the movie, you're a simple thrush, but you're truly so much more. I think we do get the background that the dwarves taught certain birds how to speak, but obviously this thrush would be relatively long-lived had the dwarves of the Lonely Mountain taught it how to communicate. But a little hint at the kind of supernatural aspect of the world. Yeah,
and before we go into the mountain, the one thing I noted about the men of Lake Town is they don't wear pants.
Yes, I noticed that too.
They all wear
short tunics.
Yeah, they're like belted Roman tunics. And if we're talking about male anatomy, I mean, we're talking inches of cloth protecting you from just constantly seeing testicles.
So a couple things are true here. One, maybe the men of Lake Town are not particularly well endowed. Two, it could be cold.
Yes.
And we have
it is
shrinkage.
Cold,
yeah. There's probably some shrinkage in play, or there's some type of loincloth. I don't know. But if the Tolkien estate could provide a little bit of clarity on,
when they first started walking around, I was like, whoa, wait a minute. That is a very provocative clothing for these men.
There's I think the scene that struck me was when they're pulling the barrels out of the water. And so it's like, if you're a dwarf, you're getting pulled up out of the water and you're getting a full straight up shot of the Lake Town men. Yeah.
But okay, now let's go in the mountain.
Yep.
Smaug has, I guess it's how they're portraying where he's looking, but the spotlight eyes were kind of strange to me.
Well, and we should talk about, Smaug, something that kind of always stuck with me watching this movie, even as a little kid, is the portrayal of Smaug as kind of feline. He's got cat ears that are upturned. Dragons, most other times in mythology and fantasy, are portrayed as reptilian with no ears. He has very obviously cat eyes. His face is somewhat of a I'm gonna like somewhat of a snout, but it's a little bit more snub nose, and then he has fur on his back, very very furry back. So the portrayal of the Smaug dragon is interesting. This is an area where I do like the change in the Peter Jackson of going with a more traditional mythic European style of dragon. I don't dislike the Hobbit thing. It's just a minor point, but one that is noticeable.
Mm-hmm. As I was going through, I noticed he's feline, he's hairy, he's a reptile. His spit is like acidic.
Yeah, I like that.
So
I
it's
like
kind of like
that.
a black dragon if we're talking D&D. And
I
then
like
one thing go ahead.
well, I like when he's kind of cataloging all of his features. My what does he say? My teeth are swords, my claws are spears, my tail is a thunderbolt, my wings are a hurricane, and my
Mhm.
breath is death.
Yeah.
That's a fun line.
So I had mentioned in my notes, he kind of has two sets of hands.
I noticed
If
that
you
too.
if you
Yeah.
looked at his wings, he kind of has like bat hands on the
Yeah.
ends of his wings, but then he also has his like hands, his normal hands. So he has like six appendages,
Yeah. We should get a
six
bat.
limbs.
We should get a bat scientist to come on a couple weeks from now and discuss this. Like, how does that work?
The anatomy of smog.
Yeah.
And then I just wrote down, I think a hairy dragon is kind of a bad design flaw because his hair would catch on fire. It always smelled like burnt hair.
Oh, you're right. Yeah. Good point.
What else? And then I wrote, and you had mentioned this is just a critique of the Lonely Mountain in general, but whenever they cut to the main entrance of the mountain, there's a giant river flowing out of it. And I just want to know, where does the river originate? And you had mentioned in the animated or the live action Hobbit, there's also a river flowing out of it. But even if Tolkien,
I think it's in the book.
even if Tolkien wrote that into the book, you got to explain that. Is water just apparating in the middle of a mountain? Is it glacial? What's going on?
No, it's a good point. I mean, if if we were, and we will rewrite the Hobbit in the way that we think it should be done, we'll explain that. We'll talk about the glacial melt. It'll be a metaphor for climate change. I think Tolkien would want more metaphors and allegory in his children's stories. But yeah, I think it is in the book. Little minor thing. On a more serious note, something I did notice is that once Smaug leaves and is killed, and they're in the mountain, and as we're preparing and heading into the Battle of the Five Armies, they really, and this is where maybe even the original book didn't have a lot of this detail, but the descent of Thorin into the dragon sickness, and when he becomes a little bit more tyrannical and warlike, and when he becomes a dick, like there's just not enough development there, because this version they also cut out the Arkenstone. They don't talk about his becoming overwhelmed by the dragon sickness as they do in the book and as they show in the live action, which makes the confrontation with Bilbo a little bit like, where'd this come from? But again, it's not a major point, because it kind of turns more into Bilbo just doesn't know anything about war because he's a hobbit, and whereas the dwarves and the elves and the humans do, and they're more warlike, and that's kind of the contrast, and it goes well into the the final words.
And they kind of, it's kind of jarring when there's the whole, I think it's Balin comes back and he reports back to Thorin and he calls him my king. And then Bilbo's like, what? My king? This is Thorin. Yeah. And Thorin's like, thank you, General. And then it's like, and that's one of the problems of this being such a short film, is that you don't get that build up. But that's a small qualm. Yeah. And to round it out for my notes, the last thing I wrote was the voice actor for Elrond being born in the 1800s. I mean, the rest of it is Dane shows up. You never really see Dane. Yeah, you see maybe some other dwarves in the lead up to the battle. I don't think so. I think you see just the company. No, is it? Okay. Because they have their little song, which again, I'm about to crack the book open to see if it's in the book, but the kill the men, kill the elves, keep the gold for ourselves, which is just so great. And then just such a random like turnaround too, when it looks like maybe a dozen goblins on wolves coming down the hill, and they're like, "Oh yeah, let's all just agree. Oh, thank you, oh honorable elven king. Let us team up together and do this." And I don't know. Oh yeah, I like Thorin and Thranduil are like, "Oh, you've always been my truest friend and ally. Let's join our armies." And then at the very end, Bard is like, "Me and all my men are at your call too." It's like, oh, well, like, don't forget about us. Yeah. And in this movie, doesn't Bomber die? Like, isn't that
Yes, Bomber dies in this movie.
he doesn't die in the book.
Well, I did have that note. Like the casualties are a lot worse in the movie than in the book. I think in the book it's just Thorin, Keely, and Philly, and the two of them die kind of defending him when he fell.
Yeah.
And because technically, I think they're his cousins and they're like members of his cousins, his family. But everybody else survives. And in this one, they showed Bombor injured and then talk about how he died. And then they killed off a handful of the other dwarves as well.
But that's all I have in terms of notes. Overall reactions. Do you want to get into that?
Let's see if there's anything. A couple other lines or little things that I wrote down here. Is Bilbo a communist and a pacifist? Because he's talking about, distributing all the treasure to everybody, regardless of prior claims. And then he's, anti-war. So that was just a little comment that I had there. I don't think it actually speaks to Tolkien's feelings necessarily, although I do think he is probably more pacifist, having experienced the horror of World War One.
Well, in the animated movie, they don't really do. I could see why they would have Bilbo react that way, because there's not really any other. I mean, there's 10 dwarves who are claiming all of this treasure, and they don't really show any other like dwarvish claim.
Yeah.
So if you're Bilbo and you're like, oh, all 10 of you or 12 of you, 13 of you need all of this treasure, that does make sense. Yeah. So I could see him in that moment being like, yeah, why don't we just give it away?
Then the final things I have are on the return journey, the conversation between Gandalf and Bilbo. I think Gandalf mentions how the prophecies have come true. The king is restored. The goblins are defeated, whatever. And Bilbo says, oh, I had a hand in that. And then Gandalf says, you don't just believe the prophecy just because you were involved in the events, which I mentioned that, I think, in some of our discussion of the animated, or excuse me, the Amazon Lord of the Rings show, which I always kind of liked as just a way of just kind of talking about and just discussing prophecy in the context of people who are going on these grand adventures. And then the movie ends with a nice little preview of the Lord of the Rings. Gandalf talking about how that ring is maybe a story to be told, and your family members yet unborn will be involved. Obviously, we all know what that means, but those are my final comments. Parting thoughts. Fantastic movie, really quick watch, great music, good storytelling, fast paced, enjoyable, memorable. If you have kids, if you haven't seen this movie, go out, watch it yourself, share it with your kids. Yeah,
if you don't feel like reading the book over a few days or a week, you could just knock it out in an hour by watching this animated film. We talked about what we're going to do next week as the Bakshi Lord of the Rings. I've never seen it, and I don't know if you have. Have you?
Only parts. Yeah.
Only parts. So I'm really interested to compare these two, especially the production companies, because I know when you just look at the animation looks entirely different.
Oh yeah.
And I didn't dislike this animation. I really enjoyed it. So when I looked at how they animate characters, especially the hobbits and Bakshi's Lord of the Rings, I don't think I really liked it very much. So I'm interested to see how I feel at the end of the film.
Yeah, and they also use rotoscoping in the Bakshi Lord of the Rings. So the animation feel is very different. And I think one thing that translates into is that characters that should be a little bit more inhuman just look like humans. So I think a lot of the orcs and the goblins in the Lord of the Rings animated they just look like humans with face paint, basically, as opposed to this where the goblins are animalistic and exaggerated, and it really comes off well. So we're going to look at the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings, and then did you want to look at the Rankin and Bass Return of the King in the same episode, or you want to do another episode with that before we let's do
another episode, because we have season 2 of Legend of Vox Machina coming out, and I think I just want to be up to date with those new episodes as they're coming out. Good. So then when Vox Machina is over, we can do a one-off on Rankin and Bass Return of the King.
Cool. Okay. So that's what we'll do. And then, as always, folks, please like, share, subscribe to the podcast, like us on Facebook, share it with your friends. As Sean mentioned, we are moving into coverage of Vox Machina, The Legend of Vox Machina Season 2 on Amazon Prime. So if you were with us for Lord of the Rings, you should have Amazon Prime. Get ready for Vox Machina. Catch up on Season 1 with our reaction podcast, also available on this feed. Sean, anything else before we say goodbye?
No, I'm just on my way to go to Dorky's in Tacoma to play some arcade games and then get ready for another work week.
All right. See you, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Bye.